Just hit record there. Let's go. Yeah, here we are. Okay, recording started.
Gotcha.
Awesome. Well, Keith, it's great to have you on Tech Exec series number 7 or 8. I'm kind of losing count here, but I appreciate your time. I'm really excited to talk about today's topic. It's cloud, but it's specifically focusing on FinOps and realizing the opportunity cloud and a good cloud strategy has for an organization. This is something that I know you're passionate about. We're gonna link to some things you have going on in your LinkedIn profile, but I would like for you to just share your kind of background and your experience with cloud strategy, cloud migrations, and then from there we can just talk about trials, tribulations, and all the good stuff and bad stuff around cloud optimization. So go ahead, Keith.
Sure, that sounds great. Yeah, so I've been doing cloud since 2009. I had held several CIO and CTO jobs before then, but cloud was, somewhat non-existent. It was all data centers before, say, 2005. But 2009, I was working for IHS Global and in charge of their enterprise architecture, and we were about to do a transformational thing, right? So the idea was that we needed to do infrastructure better, we needed to do our application management better, and we needed to capitalize on a lot of economies between different application stacks and infrastructure needs. And cloud was the new way to do that. So I was an early adopter of Azure at that time, and we built up a very heavy footprint around Azure initially, and then later on dabbled in AWS and all in my tenure there. And also since then, I've become certified in AWS. So I never stopped working on cloud after 2009 to 2011 at IHS. For many companies since then, and now in my in my interim CIO and CTO roles that I was doing with Avant Logix, and now with Wavestone, cloud seems to come in all the time. We often start with some sort of a transformation need, or even a cyber need, or a data need, and then cloud is just part of the equation. Sometimes it's a big part, sometimes it's a complementary part, but it's always there. So in the last couple of years in particular, I've gotten very involved with things like cloud centers of excellence, because many companies that were just starting their journey would need that. And that grew into things like cloud FinOps and cloud optimization. And even more recently, I've written a strategy brief on cloud security. These things are all intertwined, of course, but depending on where you are in your cloud journey, you're going to need all of these at some point.
Yeah, so that's interesting. So around 2009, cloud was talked about as more of like just an infrastructure strategy than an all-encompassing application strategy. Is that right?
So many companies went to the cloud first because they had heard these grand plans of how they were going to save a lot of money by taking their infrastructure out of the data centers and move them into the cloud. And there's some truth to that, but there's also a bit of naivety that was promoted by many, by the cloud service providers, because they wanted you to put everything in the cloud. And if you just blindly went to the cloud, mass lift and shift, if you will, infrastructure as a service only, then you're missing out on a lot of cloud economies, a lot of security as well. And you really need to think about your application workloads. How are these moving to the cloud? The infrastructure goes along with your application and functional needs, your workflows. And if you just did a mass lift and shift, many companies found out they were not getting the economies they were promised. So then after the fact, gee, we got to optimize some things. Our FinOps that we just stood up is telling us that we're spending a lot of money and we're probably wasting a lot of money. So as fate would have it, with what we know today, you would not do a mass lift and shift hardly ever, or you would at least be aware of what you were foregoing if you're doing it. Instead, you would analyze those application stacks for the optimal, or at least acceptable level of optimization in moving the related infrastructure for your workloads to the cloud. That way, if you did, well, if you did a mass lift and shift and then try to optimize later, it was much harder to do.
Yeah. Okay, so that's interesting. So the planning phase for cloud migration or going into the cloud has changed obviously drastically since 2009. So if I'm an organization that is not happy with their strategy today around on-prem versus in the cloud, just I'm looking at it from a very basic kind of overview. Let's say I'm the CFO in a pretty big organization, and I'm talking to the person that runs the IT department, whether it's a CIO by title or an IT director or a VP of IT, doesn't really matter. When you're looking to like plan that out, when you're looking to start moving to the cloud and not infrastructure first, not from an infrastructure strategy standpoint, how do you start that planning phase? Like, where do you start? What do you look at? What do you audit?
Yeah, and you think of it as an enterprise transformation. So what are your workloads? What are your processes that are going to be impacted? What are your data needs? And really, this is not that much different than the way we did transformations 20 plus years ago. But how to say that the cloud world seemed to oversimplify it to we're just going to mass lift and shift, get things over there, and then we'll optimize its performance later. Now it's and by the way, there used to be more diligence done in moving, say, between data centers, in a transformation than some of these lift and shifts. It's like we're gonna do this department, then we're gonna do this department, and now you want to kind of go back to the diligence that we did in the past for data center moves. You'd want to do now for your cloud moves, because not only are there savings there, but there's much better performance. So the cloud services, the way you would optimize a cloud workload is not just based on the best infrastructure, the best machine image, and configuration. You would also have a mix of any virtual machines that you would stand up with the cloud services. And there's more cloud services every year. These guys, AWS, Azure, GCP, they're all competing to give you more as a services on their platforms. And if you're foregoing those, you're missing out on some great opportunities. When we talk about optimization, think in terms of automation as well. Things like auto scalability or elasticity, as AWS would call it, scaling up and scaling down as needed, but doing it through a configuration so that humans don't have to get involved. And what you'll find is if you create a really solid footprint in the cloud, it requires much less human maintenance. You'll have that scale up and scale down for, say, client facing or customer facing services, and at the same time, your security will be built in. Your DevSecOps, your CI/CD becomes that much more easily integrated when you do this in the cloud.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. So just back to the kind of the planning phase and the evaluation. You're looking at it from somebody trying to save money or trying to make things more automated or optimize some stuff that they feel like they don't have being an organization. Who should be pushing the security piece from the get-go? Like, should it be security, like a CISO? Should IT be thinking about it? Because again, security sometimes is an afterthought when you're trying to do this, because it becomes either a money or an efficiency kind of conversation first and foremost. When does that come in? Because security is now bigger than ever with all the phishing and all the multi-factor authentication around applications. Like who comes in with security first and foremost? It should be on everyone's mind.
And you bring up a very good point. We talk a lot about how cloud has changed dramatically since 2009. Well, cyber has changed even more dramatically since then. The types of attacks, the threat vectors and such are so much more elaborate now, and they're growing all the time. And we haven't even talked about AI, which is adding a whole new layer to attack surfaces. But when you think about your cloud transformation, your move to cloud, your cloud strategy, I would recommend bringing security in early. You want to kind of integrated into your plans all along. In other words, if you're going to optimize a workload, meaning you're going to change, I mean, it's all about change management, if you will. If you're going to change the mix of virtual machines, the makeup of those virtual machines, configurations, but you're also going to have some new cloud services. And by the way, new network configurations and such. Security just has to be part of the conversation, definitely. Again,
Yeah.
you can do it around the composite of an application workload, a major process, that we're moving to the cloud, and your security requirements at the highest level probably don't change, although it's a chance to revisit. Um, but you do want to build in those non-functional security requirements, etc., into your transformation and build it out that way. And that might mean uh, the way you've set up your infrastructure, the way you configure ports and all the normal stuff you would do, but also the way you would configure certain services that that cloud service provider might provide for you that give you enough options that you could be insecure if you're not careful.
Yeah. So from the planning phase, security should be involved, like at the steering committees, at the conversation from the get-go. So from a digital transformation standpoint, cyber is a core tenant.
It's a major requirement, and you can't do any transformation these days without bringing security to the forefront. If you try to do anything like that as an afterthought, it's just not going to work well, and you're going to leave yourself exposed.
Okay.
And by the way, one of the major imperatives that helps drive some of the cloud growth is the attacks on data centers. So I've worked with a number of clients that have had ransomware attacks in their data centers, and instead of rebuilding those data centers, they're now going to build up a cloud footprint, while they're cleansing what's left of their data center. Hopefully they were able to get their data back and such, but not all have. And sort of lesson learned, we're not going to do this again on-prem. You have some better controls in the cloud, and you're going to do that from the start as you build up your cloud footprint.
Okay. So that kind of all makes sense from security. I'm just going to move on because I'm interested in I suppose an acronym, not really a word you brought up. It's not used a lot when you're talking to people about cloud, but I think it is very important, like the FinOps piece and just optimization in general. But can you, for people that will watch this, explain what FinOps means in just like a definition for laymen?
Sure. So financial operations, FinOps for short, is basically the financial management of your cloud growth, cloud footprint, cloud strategy, and it puts the guardrails in place so that as you build up your footprint, that you're doing it in a pragmatic way that doesn't, cause expenses to go out of control. As you know, the cloud is purely a consumption model. And some companies have made the mistake of just kind of saying, okay, we now have a license, or we now have an enterprise discount program with AWS, for example. And so departments have at it. And before you know it, you have a lot of VMs that are just spinning. Nobody even knows which ones are on or off. Um, People are picking the wrong size of VMs to work. And this also happens when you do a mass lift and shift, and someone says, well, we built it this way in the data center, so we should build it this same strength in the cloud. And you actually don't want to do that. You might have built it for what would be an extreme workload, like 90% capacity, because you had to do that because you procure it one time in the data center. In the cloud, if you only need half of that capacity on average, normally, you would build it that way, and then you would configure it so that it would spin up additional VMs as needed by some sort of a trigger mechanism when it reaches a threshold. Otherwise, and this is a common story with many of my clients, is we moved all the stuff to the cloud. We thought we were going to be saving X amount and we're spending twice as much. And then you simply look at some of the ways they set up their VMs and they're not using the cloud services. Um, and then they say, yeah, that's because you oversized a bunch of machines. So FinOps, I kind of got off track there a little bit, but FinOps it's a way of life. It's a process. There's usually a team involved that's how to say that understands the cloud and understands the cost implications of making certain decisions. But there's also some great tool sets. The cloud service providers themselves provide some really good FinOps tool sets to start with. And there's a number of third-party tools that we could talk about in another session sometime that complement those CSP tooling. And but the idea is you want to pay the least amount for the right performance, and FinOps helps you find that balance. It also helps you see, so it creates an observability point of your cloud footprint to say, hey, this thing is costing me this much. Heck, I didn't even know that was running. Let's turn that off. Or it's way too expensive. Let's right size it. Or there's and I'll pick on databases for a moment. Instead of spinning up VMs for databases, how about a database as a service occasionally? Those are the things that spin scale up and down as needed. And well, I shouldn't say both, all the service provider platforms have database as a service options, and they're usually better used than VMs. Now, if you have to run a super old level of a database, then you might have to do a VM. Otherwise, database as service is usually your best bet.
I like that you stopped yourself from saying both and then said all. You may have offended some other providers out there, but I think it goes back then to like the planning phase, right? And I do want to talk more about FinOps and what that looks like on a granular level. But how to right size your cloud infrastructure goes back to the planning phase. So it sounds like one of the things or the thing that is most important is knowing what your tech infrastructure, your entire tech is today, and then what you want in the future. And it obviously can't just be about money. It has to be about efficiency and automation. And so labor comes into it. And then obviously cost and finance comes into it. Like, how you're supporting different business units comes into it, like all that. So again, I think it goes back to like having the right people at the table in a steering committee or a planning committee to properly choose subscription level and types of services that are on the table that are being offered. But and from a planning phase, and I suppose I'm coming to a question here. When you're looking at FinOps from a planning phase, because the operations are kind of like on a visual basis is like dashboards, I suppose, and just like data reports and that kind of thing. How do you get to know what the right size is before you jump into like a multi-year contract? Because like you, I have clients that when I'm talking to them, like the initial engagement, because I come in at a different point in the conversation than you do, is I'm 1 year into a 3-year or a 5-year contract, and I have an extra bill that I didn't see come through because of not fully realizing what we just purchased. How does FinOps, I suppose, help with clawing back like money that you've spent that you haven't accounted for, haven't accrued for?
Yeah, so there's a FinOps life cycle, and the first step is your budgeting and forecasting step of the life cycle, and eventually it culminates in later stages with reporting and dashboarding, as you mentioned, and that comes into different styles. But the first step, we'll spend a moment on that, is to budget and forecast. You have to analyze those workloads, understand what you're applying to them today. How well is that working? Is that the right performance level? Could we do with a little bit less, or does it need more? And with that current infrastructure, perhaps in a data center, what does that look like, and what should it look like in the cloud? Would that be some VMs? Would it be some cloud services or a mix? And with that, some FinOps tools will help you do that budgeting and forecasting, and actually some of the CSP tools as well. will give you a rough estimate. Now, I'll be perfectly honest.
Oh, sorry, Keith. Could you just explain what CSP is? I just want to make sure that people understand the acronyms and the, you know.
Yeah, sorry, cloud service provider. So
Okay,
that would
cool.
be your AWS or your Azure, right? Or
Yep.
GCP and a few others, IBM Bluemix, etc. So, but long story short, you want to try to estimate what your expected performance is and what your expected cost for that performance is going to be when you go to the cloud. Now, I'll be perfectly honest, none of these tools are perfect. You're going to have to live it. You're going to have to live the dream in order to refine it. But there's no reason you shouldn't try to be precise about that as you're embarking into the cloud, and then refine from there. And the FinOps tools help you do that. They'll help that observability about what's working, what's not. And then good FinOps tools even provide recommendations that are dynamic about, hey, you're doing this and it's costing you this much. You really should be doing that. And that's getting better over time. And that's even without AI. I think there's a new evolution of AI incorporated into these FinOps tools that'll be coming up in the next few years to make it even more awesome. And at the end of the life cycle for FinOps is your reports and dashboards. So there's two things you want to do with this. You want to be able to dynamically see real time what's going on at any time, how your costs, how the meter is running. And then you also want to be able to eventually bring it back to a chargeback mechanism so that departments are perhaps paying their fair share for their consumption of cloud resources. And we often do that with the help of FinOps tools in a showback model for some period of time. So people are familiar with what their bill would look like, and they start to get that accountability. So the second part of all this, besides the observability, is the accountability. And so when people really start to own their own cost, they really care about optimization and FinOps.
Yeah, that makes sense. So it's not just an IT purchase or an IT spend; it's a marketing, it is a sales. So then let's talk about digital transformation. In that regard, then how do you go about justifying to a sales organization or a marketing organization why this is going to be better for them and the business long term? Like, how do you realize the automotive and the cost saving capacity for people in a non-tech environment? Because you've done a lot of this, so I'm sure there is a way to do it.
And that conversation has changed a bit over the last few years. It's kind of interesting. You used to have to make a business case to go to the cloud, and now people are going to the cloud because they know it's sort of a cultural thing that everyone knows that at least some of the things that I'm doing need to go into the cloud for infrastructure and application management, right? And so recently, as we've developed some decks for clients, we're no longer going to, well, you should go to the cloud because you can save this much and things like that. It's you're going to go to the cloud, and now the only choices you really need to make here are what things wouldn't go to the cloud and why. Maybe it's an obsolete tech stack or something like that. But because you're going to go to the cloud with some significant part of your enterprise, you want to do it the right way, how to say, the right performance at the least cost possible. And that's where your FinOps tools are going to come into play. And by the way, FinOps and cost savings is one side of the equation. The other, in the optimization space, is your performance. You might actually find out for less cost, you can get better performance than you used to be able to do.
Okay. So and that's more on the operation side. And so when you factor that in, but that takes a while to dream it and live it and that kind of thing, when you start to see it actually flow in, the transformation happen. What as somebody that's gone through a few of these, how do you talk to non-IT people though? Like, hey, this is going to change your life. You just got to live with me for 6 months to a year or 2 years. And is there any buzzwords or things that like make sense to people like me that haven't really gone through from like start to finish and all the all the drama in between why you're doing this. In a large organization, that's important to be able to communicate that to people, right? In a smaller company, it's easier to kind of move that through. But when you're in an enterprise with 5,000 people or more, there's a lot of different people you got to make sure understand why.
Yeah, so it's interesting. The move to the cloud is not an IT only experience. It's an enterprise level transformation. It affects many processes, many departments and parts of the organization. So we often are working with, and I'll throw out some keywords. So if you're talking to the to your financial part of the organization, your CFO and friends, you're going to talk in terms of TCO and run rates and things like that. If you're talking to your operations manager, your COO, you're going to talk in terms of better performance, over time, and that the cost for that performance is going to be lower. Um, CTO is going to care about uh, how to say the advancement of the right technologies at the right time. So questions that would come up with that group and his team would be, how do we ensure we don't lock ourselves into some technology we don't want to stay with years later? And this is frankly why some companies decide to go to multi-cloud, hybrid cloud, if you will, because they don't want to lock into one cloud service provider, CSP, or another. And just to go down that path just for a little bit, my recommendation is to have a primary CSP, but it's never bad to have more than one because you have different types of workloads. And certain CSPs are much better with, let's say, Microsoft stacks for obvious reasons. Some are also better with open source, and some are better with data pipelines. And so having, let's say, having the best workloads or the workloads in the best places for them to work with the right services and and the right scalability, et cetera, is all good. So very few clients that I'm working with have only one CSP. They usually have two, but one primary that, unless there's a special need, it's going to this one. And by the way, that gives your architecture teams, your design teams, an ability to do a lot of reusability. So here's another area where there's mass economies of scale and scope by having a design pattern reuse, including FinOps. So if you optimize a particular design pattern, has say to be within your guiding principles for financial operations, then if someone reuses that, we already know they're doing the best of breed.
Yeah. Yeah, that all makes sense. And then from an after digital transformation to continue the understanding of what you've just integrated into the organization, and then people coming in who are new or don't understand. What's the best way to kind of diffuse that kind of knowledge of the new way of working and that kind of thing? The after effects of what has just transformed or what has just transpired. Like what do you do? Like, how do you deal with it?
Yeah, in fact, it's even before the after effects. You probably want to do some high-level training to the impacted parts of the organization. Now, some companies will do this through a cloud center of excellence. Cloud center of excellence is basically an enabler for the other parts of the organization that may not be as cloud knowledgeable. So they would tap the CCOE maybe for certain resources, but also for things like training and internal consulting. And but I would say early on, you want some of your leadership around, say, the people that own the application workloads. So some of the application and data owners in different departments should at least understand where their processes are going and how they're going to work going forward, and eventually become knowledgeable about things like the dashboards and the FinOps what do you call them, reports, so that they can manage their own costs. And then, beyond the initial, say, overall training or knowledge sharing, so that everyone is ready for the journey, some parts of your organization and your architecture design teams, maybe certain application teams, testing teams, security teams, are probably going to need more detailed training and certifications. And you want to build that now. So again, we're talking about a very complex multi-department journey where cross-organizationally, so that you need to think about how this is going to affect the roadmap as we go and be one step ahead of that roadmap. And when you set up your enterprise discount program with your CSPs, build into it some training discounts as well.
So that's great. And I think this is a good kind of topic to end on, which is actually negotiating with CSPs and cloud service providers and that kind of thing, because that should be done from the get-go, right? Not after the first round of contractual kind of, your first go around with AWS. Sure. When you're putting a discount program together, or you're starting that conversation, that negotiation, obviously size, scope, the services you're going to use, how deep you're going to get with Azure, AWS, GCP. How do you start if you're somebody that's this is their first time trying to negotiate? Where, what tools can you give? What experience can you kind of impart on people to start that conversation and kind of really go forward in a good manner in that kind of negotiation process?
Yeah, so understand, if you're a large organization, you're a big logo, well known, they want your business, and you might have more clout than you're giving yourself credit for. Don't let the CSP wag the dog, so to speak. Tell that they're going to have a template for an enterprise discount program, or a what's it called, a migration acceleration program that they would give to anybody. Depending on the size of your organization, you can probably negotiate some more out of it, get a few more percentage points off savings. Make sure it encompasses the types of services and VMs that are going to be part of your future. Another reason to be aware of what you think your target footprint is going to look like. And then what it all comes down to, where what you're negotiating for, is some commitment to spend for some commitment of discount. And it's important to understand your trajectory, so that you can negotiate that as best as you can up front. Also know that you can renegotiate that. So a year later, 2 years later, maybe every year, you can go back. And now, as you gain a big footprint in their cloud, in some sense, you're going to lose some negotiation power, because they know you're not going to suddenly leave them. But both at the beginning and even in midterm, let them know you do have other options. And I almost forgot a really big thing. So one of the big hidden costs in cloud is egress costs. So you move data into the cloud, you can do that all day for as long as you want for free. But if you go to take your data out, there may be egress costs, and there are for many, including some of your SaaS you may not be aware of. Be aware of your SaaS contracts and anything you're putting into those platforms. And try to negotiate egress costs to give yourself flexibility. Again, what you're looking for in the long term is the right cost for the right performance. But some of that is also going to involve the need to move data between one platform to the other, because a certain kind of workload we may have designated as working better in the other platform. So we need to move some data there. And you're not going to be able to say zero egress costs, but see if you can. And again, as a larger company, you have some leeway there. They want your business, especially if you're just getting into the cloud game, and you can equally choose one over the other, or any of the top three. let them know you're negotiating with all three.
It's awesome. Well, I definitely will want to talk to you again about tools to help optimize people that have already kind of purchased, right? So post-purchase, this conversation has been more about what do you do from a setup and maintenance standpoint, but in terms of like really understanding what you've got and how it's running, I think we should definitely have a conversation about that here in the next few months. Really appreciate your time. This has been good. This has been fun. I think there's a lot of great bits and pieces for people out there. So it's good connecting. And yeah, definitely we'll talk about this topic again down the road.
Sounds good, Greg. I really appreciate it too. I enjoy talking about this stuff. I'm passionate about it. So happy to share with anyone else that sees this and wants to talk some more.
Absolutely. Cheers. Thanks a lot, Keith.
Cheers.
Take care.
Bye-bye.